Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So today we are continuing our consideration of Hoko food. And as we've mentioned in previous weeks, there are sort of different aspects. We can talk about cooking, we can talk about ingredients and serving and eating and cleaning up. So we've heard about cooking, and we've heard last week from Sawyer about ingredients and the considerations for that. And this week, I want to think about serving and serving as a practice. So there is a guideline in our formal meal practice that says we should never actually be serving ourselves during formal meals. We should always be served by somebody else, which is really interesting. There's this whole subset of food practice that's related to serving. So in the Zen Soto, it's done in a very formal way. It's not just a matter of dumping pots on a table and people helping themselves. It's kind of a free-for-all, right, done as fast as possible. There is an actual attitude and a set of guidelines around that. So traditionally, in the Zen Soto, we'd be sitting at our places in the Soto, or in the Zendo, and eating at our places rather than sitting at a table. Technically, we eat, sleep, and sit in the same place. So this little space of the tatami is the only space in the Zen Soto we can really think about as our own. There's a little bit of storage for a few belongings. We keep our bedding in there. But in this place, we eat, sleep, sit, spend most of the day. So serving happens here, and someone brings food, right? And this is where we put out the oryoki and where we eat the meal. So at mealtime, there's a lot of coordinated sound from various instruments around the temple, and all of that sound is communicating something. It's not just decoration. It's communicating that the meal is ready, that the fires have been put out, that it's time to shift into meal practice, which can be a bit elaborate. So servers are going to report to the kitchen to take the food across to the Soto. When we look at how the temple is set up, a couple of weeks ago, Todo-san was talking about the Shichido Garan, where the buildings are in relation to each other. The Soto and the place where the food is coming from are facing each other. So the servers need to take the food across to the Soto or the Zendo after the tenzo does a food sending ceremony. So you finish all your cooking, if you're the tenzo, you go put on robes, you're doing 9 bows, you're sending that food, and you're bowing toward the Soto, toward the people who are sitting. So there's a whole sending of food that happens, right? It's not just about grabbing things and hauling them around. So all of that happens in coordination with instruments and chanting in the Soto, and the first being that gets served is Manjushri. It's not a human being, it's Manjushri. It's not even the head teacher, right? There's drum rolls, the Inos coming in and out, the head servers coming in and out. There's a lot of choreography there. Then the servers come along and they wipe the meal board. So if we were sitting on a ton, there's a board, a wooden board that runs along the length of this, which is where you put your bowls. So when you're getting up on your cushion, you can't sit there, you can't stand there, you can't put your feet, your butt, anything on that wood, because that's where your bowls go. So you have to kind of hop over it, right? So server's going to come along and make a run down that board and wipe that board. So again, you see why we wipe the table here when we sit down. Participants put out their bowls. There's some more chanting. The servers come around with the various dishes. 2 by 2, they serve people. So in pairs, we bow to the server, receive the food, bow again, server moves along the line. You've seen a little bit of that if you have been here for the tea time that happens on the last day of Rohatsu Sesshin. In the evening there's a tea time, and we follow a little bit of that practice just because it's in our bodies, right? How we serve that tea. Or you maybe have been here for the tea during the Honsoku Gyocha, during the Hosenshiki, right? And people are coming around 2 by 2, serving that tea. That's the same kind of attitude. So during the meal, when everyone has food, guess what? More chanting. And then we eat the meal. So in the meantime, the servers are taking care of the remaining food. They're watching. Usually the head server is watching at the door to see, does anyone need help? Did anyone drop something, spill something? Is there something going on out here that servers need to be aware of? After a while, seconds, food comes around, we can all have seconds. When it's time to wash the bowls, the servers are coming with hot water. And then a little later, they come around to collect that washing water. They wipe the meal board again. And then, other than taking things back to the kitchen, their job is largely done. So they're in and out of the Zendo half a dozen times, bringing things, taking care of people, watching what's happening here. That's the abbreviated description. It's all much more complex. As Doju can tell you, or anybody who's been in a Senmon Soto, it's actually much more complicated than that. So I have linked from Sunshin Source a video from Komazawa University that shows the entire meal, shows people doing the entire meal, all the forms, all the serving, all the nanashimono, all the chanting. Everything is there. It runs about 45 minutes. So I suggest watching it at twice normal speed and then stopping where you want to see something, right? But it's a great opportunity to really see how do all these things come together, right? It's the context for what we do here. So to find that, go to the What's New section on the homepage of Sunshin Source. That's the quickest way to get there. So for our purposes, that context is helpful. Helps us understand the attitude we take to our very much simplified version of meals here during Sesshin. It's also how we can take that attitude home with us. So for those of us that are not regularly sitting Sesshin, and I mean, most of us don't sit Sesshin every day, how do we take those teachings, that attitude, into the rest of our lives? And there's very much, there are many opportunities to do that, right? So I will suggest here that there are similarities with our attitude as Jikido, with our attitude to our work practice. I think these things are very consistent. There's some real through lines for all of this. So this is much bigger than simply formal meals in the Zendo or formal meals during Sesshin. Serving practice has a lot of other things, right, to teach us. So there's a lot written about the connection between serving and dana paramita, or generosity. There's a lot about the oneness of giver, receiver, and gift. If you look at the meal chant, and Toto-san has written about the meal chant, living by vow, giver, receiver, and gift, we hear this a lot. Interconnectedness, total dynamic functioning, those things are certainly important. We need to take those into consideration and to reflect on those things during meal practice. I want to take this in a particular direction today that we may not usually consider. And that is, serving is a practice. Serving is not a grunt job, a low-level work assignment. Somebody has to do it so that people can eat. It is in itself a whole set of dharma gates. There is, as I mentioned, a sort of a subculture. There's a subset of practice simply around serving, which when you dig into it is really interesting. So when we're serving, we're not just sort of slopping food into people's bowls in a chow line, right? It's not just a matter of getting food into bowls and into people's mouths. Ultimately, that's the goal. And when people are beginning and just learning about forms of oryoki, what I tell them is your main goal is feed yourself. Get the rest of it, right? But the main goal is feed yourself to support your practice, because that's the point of this thing. But really, our attitude is not, we're going to stand with our hands on our hips and kind of slot food into bowls. It's not a means to an end. Serving is not a means to an end. So everything from how we stand, how we use utensils is important. We are directly taking care of the entirety of the meal activity for the time that we're serving. The food, the bowls, the practitioners, the practice, the tenzo, everything. Once this is in our hands as servers, this is all up to us. We're running this gig. So many years ago in Minnesota, there was a group of 4 of us who became deeply interested in food practice. Ado was one. She's joining us virtually. We decided food practice was really cool, and we really wanted to take this on. And by that point, most of the people who had been practicing with Katagiri Roshi, who was already passed, they had left. And so I thought, okay, there's a lot here that I don't know. It was one of those cases where I do know what I don't know. It's not about, I don't know what I don't know. I did know what I didn't know, and I wanted to find out. So I tracked people down, like Shoto Spring, and I picked their brains. And I said, how did you used to do this? There were still artifacts. There were bowing mats in the kitchen. It's like, what was that for, right? So the 4 of us took this on, and we each agreed to take leadership on one aspect, to really dig into one part of this whole meal thing and learn everything we could learn. So I took on tenzo, Cindy and I think Ado took on using oryoki, deeply into how do we use oryoki. Amy took on soku, or the head of serving, right? And our thinking was, we dig into it individually, we train each other, and then we support that practice in the Sangha. And it was really interesting. We took that on for, about 3 years. I think I was at Tenzo for about 3 years. So in the very early days of Buddhist practice in communities like this, the servers were lay people serving the monks. So they were known as pure people or purifying people, which is interesting. Here's another interaction, right, between monks and laity. So eventually serving became part of the practice of the ordained Sangha. Monks rotated through that position like all the other positions, which is how we still do it. Here's a Japanese word that's important for this discussion, omotenashi. Omotenashi. As an everyday word, it can mean hospitality, right? Not to be confused, for those who are keeping a Japanese glossary, we're taking it, not to be confused with omoi no tebanashi, opening the hand of thought, because for us, this is not our native language, we hear these two things and we can conflate them, right? Omotenashi is not the same as omoi no tebanashi. Keep that straight, right, in our heads. Okay, so today, omotenashi. Omotenashi is not an exclusively Buddhist word. It sort of pervades the culture. So having to do with hospitality and serving and considering somebody's experience of something, receiving something, encountering something. So for instance, Myogen here has become interested in how to wrap things in furoshiki. There's a real element of omotenashi in that. How does somebody encounter that gift or receive that gift, right? So there's a very old way to translate this word that means you're not doing something in order to present a particular public face to other people, right? So we're not doing whatever it is that we're doing in order to be somebody or create a self-image or a public image or something like that. There's a sense that the activity of serving is transparent and in that way unpretentious. Aha, unpretentious should be familiar to us, right? Familiar in the realm of Nyoho. It's one of the characteristics of Nyoho things. They're unpretentious and unassuming. So we're not doing serving in order to be somebody. We're doing this in a really unassuming way. So we're going to come back to that, right, in a bit. So there are several themes that crop up around omotenashi. The first one is also going to sound familiar. We could call it something like selfless service, right? We take care of others sincerely and with genuine care, and we don't expect anything in return. So just like zazen is good for nothing, serving is also good for nothing, in that we're not getting any kind of reward out of that. It's a contrast, I think, to our usual North American idea of serving or service, which is often transactional for us, right? There's a customer and there's a service provider, and there's some kind of monetary exchange, or there's some kind of fee, or there's tips, or there's something transactional happening. There is nothing wrong with that, but that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about this kind of practice. It's also not the only possible approach to the practice of serving. So, yes, often it's transactional, but that's not the whole story, and it's not the way it has to be. So, for instance, there is no culture of tipping the taxi driver or the waitress in Japan, right? So, also, we're not engaged in serving in order to be popular, in order to impress people, in order to make people like us. Here, I'm going to give you this food so that you will like me, or you will be impressed by me, right? Not what is happening here. There's no place for ego in this thing. We can't get precious about it as we're standing behind the pot. Am I not a wonderful server because I didn't drip anything or because I'm standing up straight, right? No, we're just doing those things because that is the practice. So there's no place for ego in this thing. We are taking care of relationships. It is true that we're taking care of relationships. We're not doing that in a personal way, right? We're serving everybody equally. So like all bodhisattva practice, we don't pick and choose who gets good service, right, from us. Everyone is encountered equally. Everyone gets served equally. We're not getting any personal reward for what we're doing, so I'm not going to serve my friends in a particular way and other people in some other way. We encounter everybody kind of equally. So another aspect of omotenashi, anticipating the needs of others. So that means we have to pay attention and we have to read the room. And we've heard some stories from Doju about reading the room in the Senmon Soto, and that can be a challenge, right? So we're paying attention. The soku may be standing in the door watching during the meal, but even the server's in the room, right? We're paying attention. We're anticipating the needs of people before they actually need stuff. So we can respond appropriately to what's happening even before somebody asks for something or asks for help or appears to be struggling. So things don't always go the way we expect, goodness knows, during a meal or at any other time. But how do we respond as servers when something is spilled, something is dropped, the utensil we're using breaks, or it's not the right one, or we realize the watermelon has seeds and we need to collect them, and how are we going to do that before we wash the oryoki? We didn't make a plan for that. We have to respond, right? People need things. So before we need them, before we hit the roadblock, somebody's looking ahead. The third theme for omotenashi, attention to detail. We consider every aspect of somebody's experience in our space, whatever that space is, the space of meals, the space of zazen and the zendo, right? The space of coming in the front door, whatever that space is. We consider every aspect of somebody's encountering that, whatever it is that we're doing. So this is not managing detail in order to make our lives easier. I need a checklist of all my tasks, therefore I'm managing detail. No, it's not that kind of managing detail. This is in order to make sure other people are comfortable, and the most important thing is nobody has any trouble, right? So we're not making trouble for others, and we're potentially heading off trouble for others. And the whole point of this thing is people don't have trouble. So all those omotenashi themes apply to the practice of serving. Clearly, then, serving, again, is not a low-status work assignment. Somebody has to do it, so we're going to put somebody's name on it. There is a whole highly developed culture around serving. So the question I want to consider today is, what is the practice of being a host? What does that mean? So it's a role, as I say, I think starts with the jikido, who's in charge of the zendo. Being a jikido is more than just coming in and lighting the candle and ringing the bell. The jikido is the host of the zendo. This is how it was explained to me a long time ago. The jikido is the host of the zendo. So the jikido is responsible for the conditions here. So you may have noticed we used to have a list, I don't know if we still do, that rules for the zendo or guidelines for the zendo. And one of the things on there says we let the jikido manage the windows and the temperature. So we're not all running around opening and closing windows and adjusting the thermostat, right? We're leaving the jikido to do that because the jikido is the host of the zendo and is in charge of the conditions. So light level, right? Everything. For instance, I'm the morning jikido here 2 days a week, when Seigen or Hoshin is the doshi. I'm not the doshi. I get to be the jikido. So I get here a bit early. I adjust the lights. I check the flowers. I make the water offering on these two altars. I light the candle to welcome Manjushri and to welcome those who are coming to practice. And then I start here and I walk the perimeter and I go all the way around and I make sure the cushions are straight and things are right and signs are where they should be and everything looks okay. Nothing's been left out from the activity of the night before. The bowing areas are straight, right? I just do walk the perimeter. To me, that's part of being the host of the zendo. Check things and make sure they're okay. Jikido hits the han, and at home you can sometimes hear it coming through your mic all the way into the zendo. Hits the han to tell everybody, okay, it's time to come in. Room is ready, right? It's time to come in. Get ready for zazen. And then, as you saw Esho do today, Jikido stands at the door, stands next to the door, bows with everyone who comes in. Welcome to my zendo. Welcome to my zendo. Please have a good experience in my zendo, right? That person is welcoming and taking responsibility for, right? So we always know who's in charge of the zendo. Jikido's right there welcoming us in. So we've seen that under omotenashi, part of being a good host is to think about the details of people's experience. When they arrive, when they're in the space, what is practitioner's experience of that? So particularly during sesshin, jikido keeps the floor swept in here and to some degree also the front entry and maybe even those front stairs because people are going to track whatever that is all the way into the zendo. The jikido is already thinking about what is somebody's experience of arriving here, arriving in the building, arriving in the zendo. Are people arriving and being distracted by things, or are they arriving and not having any trouble sitting down and getting ready to practice? So when we arrive, we have a good feeling, even though we may never see that sweeping happening. You may never see me walk the perimeter to make sure the cushions are straight, or you may never see Esho come in the morning and check the flowers. But somehow we arrive and we have a good feeling and the place feels cared for and it feels like Manjushri is here and we can step into this space and sit down and really dive into practice. That's part of this host of the zendo, I think, function. So the same attitude of being a host carries over into our meal practice in several ways. It starts with the tenzo, because the tenzo has thought far enough ahead to make sure that when the servers get those pots and utensils and food, that it's going to be easy to serve and easy to receive. So the pieces are cut of whatever it is to an appropriate size. The utensil being offered for someone to use to serve is the right size, right? If that ladle is huge and the soup bowl is tiny, we've got a problem. So the tenzo is already thinking ahead to the server's experience and the participants' experience, and making sure that servers aren't going to have any trouble. If the cereal is really thick, it's not going to flow off the spoon, right? So one hopes that's not the condition of the cereal, but if it is, probably the tenzo's provided a spatula to help, right? So don't cause trouble for others. So then that role of thinking about that experience passes from the tenzo to the servers, because the tenzo sits down, right? And it's all in the hands of the servers. So then it's up to the servers and their responsibility to see that nothing is causing trouble, everyone's getting taken care of. That means things like when we're serving the food, we're not touching anybody's bowl with the serving utensil, right? We're very carefully pouring or depositing that food, but not only are we not pouring food down the side of the bowl, we're also not hitting the bottom of the bowl with the bottom of the ladle, for instance. It makes a noise and it can actually crack the bowl. So we have to be careful. Where is that ladle in relation to the bowl? Okay, so it means making sure that you have a pot of soup in front of you, you're a server, you're making sure that one person doesn't get all the veggies in the bottom of the soup pot and the next person only gets the broth, right? Distribute that kind of equally, right? So it might feel like the tenzo is really the one responsible for the meal, and that as a server, you're just sort of handing out somebody's work. Well, server made all the things, my job is simply to get in somebody's bowl. I'm an afterthought. This is really the tenzo's gig. And we can see, not the case. Nope, it's all you at this point as a server. You are in charge of this thing. You've been handed the food, but still, it's now your responsibility to consider everybody's experience and to be in charge of the meal practice at that point. So how you stand, how you handle items, the pots, the ladles, the spatulas, whatever, is critical. You don't take care of others by slouching and slopping. Right? That is an inattentive kind of attitude, right? You pay attention, stand up straight, hold on to the pot or the dish or whatever it is, watch what you're doing. To top it all off, you do everything as silently as possible. And we know, because we've had several conversations here about silence, what a great practice of paying attention. If you're walking silently, if you're lighting candles silently, if you're serving food silently, you must pay attention. So, the clank and clatter, if we're hearing clank and clatter, we know your mind is somewhere else. So, food in bowls, utensils, lids on pots, soup sloshing. We don't want to hear any of that, right? So it's a real, as I say, for me, it's kind of a game. How silently can I do this? Now, you have to be careful not to get precious about that, because you can really reinforce ego. Aren't I great? I served that whole thing and I didn't make any noise. It's not about that. So serving isn't a means to an end. We can see it's a practice all by itself. All that becomes more apparent when you're carrying the food around the zendo or the soto and you're stopping every two people and you're bowing and you're doing all the forms and all the narashimono are going off, right? It becomes very clear this is not a throwaway practice or a throwaway activity. So we here do a simplified version of serving and eating because we simply don't have enough people engaged in it to fill all the roles and do all the things. And I'm not sure we would go full bore even if we did, because we know we tend to do things a bit simply here. Again, to understand why we're doing what we're doing. So we're not doing ornamentation for the sake of ornamentation. If sounds are happening, they're communicating something, right? If movement is happening, we know why that's happening. Nonetheless, we need to remember the context. We didn't make this up. We simplified something, but we need to understand the something, because there's a lot of meaning in that, right? So in a way, what we're doing is shorthand. Well, we don't do all the chants, and so during sesshin, everything is silent. If you're not familiar with the chants, you kind of lose the context. There's teachings in those chants, right? Why are we holding up the bowl? Why are we putting things here? Well, if we were talking, we would be saying why we were doing those things. So we have to understand the context so that we get all the meaning out of that. What attitude, we would be taking if we were sitting in the soto with
24 people or more than 24 people, and all the sounds were happening and all the movement was happening. So, yeah, that's, again, I've linked that video, and I suggest going out to look at it because all of that context is helpful. I've also added a video of the morning service at Sojiji, which is one of the two main head temples. Why am I talking about that here in the midst of meals? I invite you to watch how things are carried and delivered, because it's happening all throughout that service in a way that we don't do here because we don't need to. They're in a huge hatto. They've got a lot of people. They're using a lot of implements and artifacts. And those things get carried and delivered, and I would argue served, I think, with the very same attitude we're talking about here. So I invite you to go look at that. People are bringing out and picking up individual books, stacks of books, Ino's stand, Doshi's table, right? People are back and forth and up and down and carrying. Now watch how they carry. Watch how they stand. Watch how they move. It's very carefully choreographed. And it is not a case of just bringing something out and handing something to somebody, right? These are very particular, careful ways of doing these things, which is one of the things you learn in the Senmon Soto. You don't just go get something and plop it down in front of someone or sort of hand it off to them, right? You put it down in a very particular way. If you watch how they carry these stands, you know, they're carrying them in a very particular way, which is fun to see, actually. I'm not suggesting we do that here. So, but you carry something just so, you walk in a certain way, you arrive in a certain way, you put it down in front of someone in a certain way, you turn to leave in a certain way. The attitude is the same as the servers during a meal, even though the meal is slightly less ceremonial than a big morning service at Sojiji. So when we first encounter the forms and the attitude related to serving a meal, eating a meal, using oryoki, considering the ingredients and the 5 colors and 6 tastes and all the things that go into a meal, we might think this is an unnecessary layer of complication. Why are we making this so difficult? Why are we making this so complicated? There's nothing special about this rice and soup, and why are we treating it like it's something precious? Or why are we doing this choreographed dance routine every time we need to get food into bowls? Like, why would we do that? Well, if you're feeding, you know, a dozen monks or dozens of monks, actually it's more efficient to do serving that way than to have a buffet line and then have to wash all that up afterwards, right? Imagine you have dozens and dozens of people and now you've got all those plates and forks and whatever, right? It's actually quite efficient the way these meals are done. More importantly, when we agree to take on forms, we agree to pay attention. We agree to cultivate respect for the items and the people and the practice and what we're doing. The point of formal serving isn't that the food is special. If you ever eat sesshin food here, you will know it's great. It's prepared very well. And also, it's potatoes and carrots and broth and rice. It is not special food. It is not exotic stuff. I remember a piece of advice I got from Shoto Spring early on. She said, and it wasn't just to me, she'd written it in a guideline, Tenzo's job is not to broaden people's horizons, right, by serving exotic foods. They're broadening their horizons on the cushion. That is not your job, right? Just serve them food. And I thought, yeah, that's actually right, because I've seen people do really exotic stuff, and people are going, I don't know what that is. Now, that's a distraction, right? So anyway, the food is simple. The formal serving is not about the food being special, exotic, whatever. We've seen Yoho teachings about why that food is so not special. We probably grew it in the backyard. Or anyway, we got it, you know, in a very simple way. The central question, if the central question of Nyoho is, does this thing create attachment? Then I think the central question of life in the temple is, how can we keep from causing trouble for others? Right? So can you imagine how this world would be if our main concern, moment by moment, was, how do I keep from causing trouble for others? Seems like an important, useful thing to cultivate, right? Meals kind of give us that chance. So, rather than being a means to an end, practice of serving is a continuation of the practice of the tenzo, and is, of course, not unrelated to the practice of everyone in the room who's sitting and eating, right? So, tenzo contributes to well-being and comfort of practitioners by choosing good ingredients, making a balanced meal, something that's nutritious and appealing and appropriate. And the server continues that practice of caring for practitioners by serving that food in a thoughtful, appropriate way. So the practitioner's experience of the food isn't only up to the tenzo. That's where it starts. And goodness knows, as a tenzo, you spend a lot of time kind of considering that, but that's not the end of it. Once that food goes out the door, then the servers pick that up. It's the result of the server's practice. How do people encounter that food? And also the serving of that food and the practice of serving that food. So great food served in a way that's kind of sloppy or arrogant or impatient, I think, is a break in this partnership between the tenzo and the server, right? Server's counting on us tenzo's counting on us as servers in a certain way to continue that practice, to fulfill carrying out that practice, right? So yes, we need to be efficient because we don't want to take too long. We don't want that the longer our meals go here during session, the less personal time people have. So people like to be expeditious, right? So they get a little personal time. But we also need to be careful and not make trouble for people who are receiving by being sloppy, slapdash, careless, right? So there's a harmony that happens between the tenzo and the servers and the practitioners, and that is what enables the practice of cooking and the practice of serving and the practice of receiving and the practice of eating. All of those practices enable each other. And there's also the cooperation of the entire team of servers. Here we have 2. In a big Senmon Soto, there can be 4, 6 more. How many people are you serving? Because it needs to be fairly efficient, and there can be a fairly big team. We only have 2. They're standing in one place because we're going to them in the way that we do this, and we are bringing our bowls and being served rather than the servers moving around. But in larger places, with 4, 6, 8, how many servers moving around, there is a soku, or a head of the serving team, that's directing the traffic. So now we have another whole layer. Soku is literally the person who sends out the food, right? So he, she, they are watching not only their own activities of directing and helping the servers, they're also monitoring all those servers and how that's going. And you can see that in the Komazawa video, right? Somebody's in there watching, making sure things are happening the way they should happen. As we've seen, both Nyoho and Omotenashi remind us to be unpretentious, unassuming. So when we're serving, we're not trying to stand out, call attention to ourselves. Again, we're not doing this for recognition. That is a lesson I personally had to learn because I took great pride in how fast I was able to move with a big bowl of soup and not drop anything or spill anything and serve people and move on. I took real pride in doing that in what I thought was a very precise way, and I'm sure that hurry-scurry energy threw people off. Looking back, right? I thought I was doing my best, right? I thought I was being very sincere and dedicated, and looking back, I can imagine that hurry-scurry energy was not helpful. And I probably called attention to myself because of it. So let's be unpretentious in our serving and not call attention to ourselves. Let's take care of people in unobtrusive ways, perhaps even invisible ways. If we're really seamlessly doing serving practice, folks may not even be aware of everything we're doing or everything we're not doing that we could be doing. For instance, if we're being as silent as possible while we're serving, then I hope nobody actually notices the absence of noise, right? We're not going to notice, oh, that server's being really careful and not making noise. We don't notice until noise starts happening and then we think, what's going on, right? Nonetheless, we're taking care of others by not being out of control, by not being inattentive. So having said that, it's also, of course, the practice of those of us being served and being cared for, not to be oblivious by how we're being supported in our sitting and in our practice, right? These folks are making an offering in a certain kind of way. So we need to not just say, oh, well, that's their problem. My experience is their problem, right? We need to not be oblivious to that. Probably nobody's going to call attention to it. So again, there's this partnership happening. So one of the things that ties together the ways, right? Way of tea, way of calligraphy, way of flower arranging, right? The doughs, the ways. One of the things that ties those things together, they are simple, everyday activities, but they're done with a high degree of cultivation. So people write every day, right? People drink tea every day. And yet there's a way to do those things with a really high degree of cultivation and to really make them opportunities for lots of things. For attention, for refinement, for cultivation. So we can apply that to any action, like, I would argue, serving. Can I put a bunch of salad greens in your bowl with a high degree of cultivation, which is not about me, which is not about me saying, look at how precise I am and how wonderful I am. As a server, can I simply put those greens in your bowl with a high degree of cultivation? In other words, I'm paying attention to my deportment. Interestingly, the root of deportment, portere, to carry. How am I carrying myself, right? So I'm paying attention to deportment. How do I, in that simple act of serving salad or soup or rice, how do I carry myself? Omotenashi reminds us to pay attention. If I'm paying attention, there's no wasted motion. I'm not flapping around. No wasted energy, that hurry-scurry kind of hurry-up energy. Movements are conscious and deliberate and precise, and that doesn't necessarily mean slow. That's a real pitfall for us, I think, in North America. One of the real misunderstandings about this thing we call mindfulness is that everything needs to be done at a snail's pace, or otherwise somehow our human brains can't pay attention, right? I would argue it is entirely possible to be very mindful and be moving very quickly. So there's a story from many years ago about a Zen center that opened a restaurant. There were a number of Zen centers back in the day that opened restaurants or cafes, but I'm thinking of one in particular. And they hired mainly Zen students, right? Mainly practitioners. They had some problems when one or more of these servers, Zen student servers, was being incredibly slow and meticulous about setting the tables. Their argument was, this is the way we practice. I'm paying attention. I'm being mindful. I'm going to be very slow and precise. And meanwhile, the lines at the door are backing up, and diners are getting impatient, and no one's actually being helped or seated, because there was this fixed idea about what mindfulness, what precision and hosting and serving, right, was about. So these folks thought this was the only way to practice and do mindful work, was to sort of disregard the rest of the situation and focus only on this thing in front of me, right? They ended up causing trouble for others, not only the diners, but the bosses who were trying to move this thing along, right, and run this operation. So we need to not stand out, and sometimes what's happening is that things are moving quickly, and then we also need to move quickly, right? Yes, deliberate, precise, but not at the expense of being a roadblock. So to be unpretentious and to be unassuming means not to be self-involved, right? Look around broadly. We have to balance attention to detail and not sticking out and seeing broadly. So one other way in which we need to practice paying attention, particularly during sesshin, it may feel like we're doing the same thing over and over and over, 3 meals a day, and we are. And in fact, the repetition of that sesshin is helpful because we always know what the next thing is. The next thing is always zazen, almost always, right? So we can let go of worrying about what's the next thing on the schedule, what's the next thing I have to do. We're doing the same thing, zazen, kinhin, zazen, kinhin, zazen, kinhin. We can let go of wondering about that. But this practice is not about just sort of crawling into a rut and coasting along. Somehow in the midst of that repetition and that letting go of discursive thinking and what's the next thing on the schedule, we can't just sort of become unaware. We can't become oblivious. So as we know from practicing with forms in general, at first we're all kind of hyper-aware because we're trying to do things properly, and I've never done this form before, and I'm going to be embarrassed if I get it wrong, and so, right? Watching others, trying to keep up. Once things become familiar, we can find ourselves sort of going through the motions. We get into that rut, we coast along, oh, it's time to gusho, oh, it's time to bow, right? Even oryoki meals can become that way, right? So we can do things sort of properly, but without any real attention, without any real sincerity. And of course, this is one of the things Uchiyama Roshi was worried about, right? If we simply do ritual forms because it's the thing that's on the schedule and we don't know why we're doing them, we've lost something really important. So actually, I think it's good if we treat every gasho like the first gasho, every bow like the first bow, every time we chant the robe chant like the first time we've ever chanted the robe chant. This may be the 20th time during sesshin that we've set up the tables, and the tenzo's got the food ready, and servers are carrying out the meal, and we're always doing everything the same way, and we go through the same process for serving and eating and washing up. But this moment is this moment, even if it's the 20th meal, even if you've set up those tables 3 times a day for 7 days, this moment is this moment. As we learn, every time someone falls down while carrying bowls of soup, every time someone pours scalding hot water into a cracked bowl, suddenly everybody's aware. Oh my gosh, something different happened, right? So anything can happen. Every time we do something, it's a little bit different because of impermanence. And it's exactly the same thing with serving. We can serve 3 times a day, and yet, right, this is this moment. This is the only time we get to serve this meal in this way. And we need to pay attention to that. So 2 more Nyoho characteristics are that we use what exists and we maintain a connection to the past. So our serving process here is based on Antaiji's serving process, which in turn is derived from the full formal process you will see on that Komazawa University video. We didn't make this process up for ourselves here. We used what existed, and we maintained a connection to our ancestors before us. When it was time to revive our formal meal practice here, I started with what our immediate ancestors were doing at Antaiji. It was the next step back, right? It was the first step back to see what were others doing. But we are not Antaiji here. We had to make some modifications. We don't have their space. We don't have the same people. We have different considerations. I hope we've retained the spirit in spite of that. And because of impermanence, we know adaptations are going to continue to happen. At our last session, we didn't even have enough people to do our usual serving procedure. We had to simplify, which was a wonderful practice, a wonderful exercise, a wonderful practice, because I think we maintained the spirit, even though we had to simplify what we did. And it all still worked. So in order to keep our connection with the past, we have to understand this context. Otherwise, how do we make decisions like that if we don't know what the context is? That's one reason I linked the video, so we can see and understand where does our serving practice come from, and that keeps us from making assumptions when it's time to adapt something, right? We can make good decisions because we know why we're doing things. What things can we modify? What things can we maybe put aside? What things are absolutely critical? What's the spirit of that, right? How are we serving people? So as we can see, it's important to approach a serving assignment with attention and intention. It is not just one more task on a list of work tasks that Sawyer or Isho or somebody is assigning. This is as cultivated a practice as Zazen or bowing or being a tenzo. That makes it a huge Dharma gate for us. So, of course, there are many ways in which we can take that practice into our daily lives. Maybe on a regular basis we're actually offering food to our friends and families. Maybe it's our turn to cook that day, or it's our turn to set the table that day. Maybe we're serving people in our jobs. We're taking care of clients. We're welcoming people into the workplace, whatever that may be. You know, I would argue we're serving many times during a day, whether or not we're actually serving food, right? How are we interacting? How are we welcoming people? How are we caring for people? Are we doing that in an attentive, sincere way? Or are we simply going through the motions? Or in some ways, are we not being welcoming at all? We're ignoring what people need. We can't be all things to all people, but we can at least pay attention, right? So every month during Rakufusatsu, we hear this line in the Kyoju Kaimon that says we should respectfully accept, attend, and serve the 3 treasures. So folks like Carla comes every month, to Rakufusatsu, and I see others who do as well, right? Every month we hear we should respectfully accept, attend, and serve the 3 treasures. So serving even shows up there, right? Sometimes that looks like the head server or the tenzo making a food offering to manjushri during the meal. Sometimes that looks like simply engaging in an activity with others without being disconnected, without expecting a reward. So what would others like to say this morning about the practice of serving, whether that involves food or other kinds of serving, and perhaps how that's related to meal practice in general, or whatever's on people's minds? Folks in the room, Mark.
Yeah, so one of the hardest things that I have with this practice is deportment.
Deportment.
Yes, and particularly just the really being able to kind of pay attention to detail, and oftentimes, especially like taking it outside of this, where at least when I'm here, I know that I'm supposed to be sitting in a particular way, but also serving meals in a particular way. But I also think it becomes a particular challenge during like like a sesshin or some sort of intensive retreat where I'm getting rid of concepts for the entirety of the time, and then comes time to pay real close attention to detail when you're serving, and all you can really see is, okay, this is the ladle that goes in here and places there and served in this particular way with these both hands. All I'm doing is getting into concepts in the more like minute level, whereas like the kind of being the mindful of the broader reality at the same time becomes really, really difficult. And so I'm curious if there are any sort of, whether there's this kind of practice technologies or anything to be able to kind of make those two things work in your head at the same time.
Well, I'm stopping at practice technologies. So I think there is no easy answer to that challenge, and I think it's one of the reasons sesshin is important, because we are doing these daily activities with a high degree of cultivation. And this is not the way we get to do them in the rest of the world, right? So we're sitting in the cushion, dropping off body and mind, and yet somehow we still have to function, right? So it's a wonderful reminder about how we can't just sit zazen in front of a wall and kind of go into la-la, because we can't, right? So somehow we need to function in the worlds of form and emptiness, and then not get so caught up in one or the other that we fall down so heavily on one side or the other that we can't hold them both, right? So sesshin is this wonderful container for letting us practice, not figure out, but practice, holding both of those things at the same time. Because we know we're engaged in form in here all the time. Every time we get up from the cushion, every time we sit down on the cushion, there's form, and we're paying attention to how am I bowing and where are my hands, and we all know gasho is not here, gasho is not here, so it's your fingertips are at eye level and you're this far away, and after a while that gets into your body, I guess, and you're not making kind of discursive thinking about that. But can we transfer that same ability to, it's my turn to ring the bell, it's my turn to sweep the floor, it's my turn to serve the soup, yeah? But I think the great thing about what you're saying is you're aware of what's happening for you. You can see yourself going down that rabbit hole, right? So it's an opportunity to go, okay, wait a minute, what am I doing? Yes, I need to serve this soup without spilling down the side or onto someone's raksu. I need to not, clank the utensils wrong. And also, I need to be aware, perhaps, what's the server next to me doing? Is someone over there struggling? How long have I got to do that, right? I mean, there's just all these things you carry in your head. So I think sesshin is a wonderful opportunity to really wrestle with that challenge, yeah? Because it would be really easy to fall down on one side or the other. Oh, well, I've spent, 5 hours in zazen, just as long as food gets in the bowl, right? Which we can't. I mean, there's scalding soup in front of us, right? We can't do that. And yet we could get so wrapped up. I think it's really interesting to look at the body language of servers. I can tell exactly where their minds are. Some of them are just so caught up, and then some of them are like, they have no idea what they're even doing, right? It's super interesting. So I'll just say, I can't give you a magic bullet. I do think, though, what you're raising is a really important intersection that we all get to practice with, and maybe it's serving and maybe it's somewhere else. Yeah? Okay. I think that's important.
Thank you.
Other things in this room, please.
I guess I would just maybe add like one thought that I have about that is, in Opening the Hand of Thought in Uchiyama Roshi's book, it has the sort of line where zazen,
Yes.
tangential lines. And as we're sitting in zazen, I think if we're kind of doing it the way we should be, you sort of notice those moments when you're veering off the line and you bring yourself back to the posture, to the room, and so forth. And I think comportment is very similar. As you're one of the things that I continue to do is that I was corrected on a lot in Japan is sticking my thumbs out when you do gasho. You're supposed to have them here rather than like that. And so often I'll catch myself doing that, and I just remind myself of the thumbs in, and it's kind of just coming back to that line. At least after a while, I think there's always the initial period where you're just learning to do something and you're kind of freaking out.
But that's so helpful because it is a direct relationship to the zazen we're doing. It's the same attitude and the same approach, right? So that's super helpful. I need to ask a non sequitur. did they say anything about when you're bowing and lifting your hands, whether your thumbs are?
Yeah, thumbs in.
See, this is if this is you, this is me, and I sometimes think I shouldn't be doing that. So now that I know for sure, I'm gonna try to rein myself in.
Every little thing, yeah. Above the ears.
Above the ears, and then thumbs not sticking out because I somehow want to do that. Okay,
And not
thank you
too,
for
not
that.
too fast, because if you go too fast, you're throwing.
You're throwing
your
your
food
food.
over your head, yeah.
Okay. I've caught people doing that, and they want to do this. Do you realize Buddha's feet are here? You're touching them. Okay.
And
Oh,
I'd add one other thing too.
Please.
At Yumonji Shoken, when I was practicing there, he was very fond of saying that practice at a temple means having the mind of service. That was like kind of almost his
Mantra?
I don't know, like punchline or not punchline,
Ah.
motto, I guess.
Practicing at the temple is having the mind of service.
Yeah, so he was saying like basically, you should always be looking around for how you can help.
Yeah.
With anything and being attentive to other people's needs and what needs to get done rather than just kind of thinking about yourself or not paying attention or whatever. And that has kind of stuck with me, I think. So.
Yeah, that's super helpful because of course we can get here and think my job is do my zazen, right? And if when we think, well, when we're here, we're part of a community, how can we fold into the community and support that community?
Well, Bodhisattva is very much about service, because it's not about you, it's what you do for
Right.
others.
Right. And we have to be skillful in that, right? So to have a few guidelines that says, okay, we're going to pay attention to detail, we're not going to be unpretentious, right? I mean, all those things are, I think, helpful. Other things in this room, comments, questions, things to bring up, things to add. Folks at home, anything from you folks today? You can either wave at me or put hands up or just open your mic. Anything from folks at home? I see a hand up. I can't see who it is.
Neil.
Neil, go ahead, Neil.
Yeah, no, I think Mark's comment earlier really struck me just about that, the challenge and kind of coming off the cushion and trying to, you talked about looking ahead and managing detail. And yeah, I think like that challenge of saying like, is that looking ahead really what goal is it focused on? And I think I do often find myself falling into the trap of thinking about, am I doing it right? And which you spoke to. And I think, yeah, just trying to say, is this getting caught up in too much thinking about the future? I don't know, like that line of, is it, am I really doing the right amount of thinking? So I don't know how exactly to frame it, but like that balance and coming off the cushion and actually doing the right amount of planning for the future. Sorry, that's.
Well, so I think, so in the particular style of sesshin that we do, we have a real opportunity to let go of a lot of that because our day does not include work period, dharma talk, dokusan, liturgy, right? We're simply eating, sleeping, and sitting. So when we get up off the cushion, it may feel like more of a hard bump because we're not getting up off the cushion every 2 hours and going off to do an activity. That's the point of the particular style that we do. So we have a real opportunity to drop off body and mind. So one of the things that does for us, as Toto-san has explained, is we don't have to think ahead to what's the next thing, because almost always the next thing is zazen, so we can let go of that part of the brain, right? So I think it's probably the only thing we really need to know is, do I have a job? Do I need to get up and serve this food? Do I need to ring a bell? Or do I have a work assignment? Otherwise, we just move into the next thing, So how much planning for the future we need to do in zazen, I hope we can help in hand. But I think that is a challenge of this particular practice and one of the things that makes it valuable. Yeah? Carla's got a hand up as well. I don't want to leave her out.
Hi, everyone. So your talk today makes me realize it's very logical that that Sanshin, the three minds, is in the Tenzo Kyokun, right? That's where it's placed. And I think the first two minds, like magnanimous mind and nurturing mind, are obvious, but there's a joyful mind too. And having been raised by a Polish grandmother, two Polish grandmothers who really took great joy in feeding their families. I really learned that growing up. And, also as being someone who worked in the food industry for many, many years, there is a real joy in serving, as long, when you're not too caught up in yourself and the context is right. And so I don't want people to forget that element of it. I think that it's a really important mind that we sometimes are afraid of, I think, oddly. So I just wanted to add that because it can really be it's great.
That's such an important point, and I'm glad you brought it up. I didn't do the whole three minds thing today, but yes, that's right. So I think as bodhisattvas, if we're really being sincere bodhisattvas, we are feeling that joy, right? In helping others not to have trouble, helping others to be comfortable, right? And that's not a selfish, self-centered joy. We have to be careful about that particular mind, because this is not about, I'm being happy because I feel good because someone will like me or because
Right.
I'm people, right? It's a really selfless joy, which just says, isn't it great that people are comfortable and provided for and cared for, and this is a safe space and things are happening here that are good and right? So yes, we need to not forget that part. I think especially during sesshin, but even at other times, it can feel like, well, this is another slog to get through. And can we approach that practice of serving with that mind of joy? It says, isn't it great? We get the chance to do this. And it may not even be something we can articulate. There's this, sort of practice joy that comes up in that. So that's really important, and I'm glad you brought it up. I think especially in the beginning, it can feel, I remember, many years ago, starting out to do sesshin in Minnesota, when it was my turn to, serve, and I had to get up. And then we actually served in the Zen. We carried the food and did the whole thing. And I remember thinking, I'm here to do zazen. Why are they breaking my zazen by making me do this? And of course, I could see that everybody had a job. Right? So can we approach this in a different way that says, isn't this great that we have the opportunity to see that people are sort of well cared for? I have to say, one of my greatest role models for that is Wiko.
Oh.
Because she, by temperament, was very much about the logistics of making sure people were comfortable. It was who she was as a human being, but I think also 6 years in Japan refined that with her. And if you saw her in her zendo running a sesshin, you couldn't articulate why that was happening, but you could really see that was it. She was happy when people were well cared for, right? She was a great role model for that. So I kind of, she's sitting up here with me today because I really learned a lot about that from her. Yeah. So thank you for bringing us back to that. I think it's important. Other folks at home? Or any last comments in the room? Are we feeling served out? All right. So let's do our closing chant, and we will serve ourselves some tea in an informal way. And we'll still take care of ourselves and each other. All right. Thanks, everybody.